So next I want to invite up Tina Treviño-Murphy. She's a student at Madison Area Technical College studying social work and education, and she's a member of the Student Labor Action Coalition in Wisconsin. Welcome, Tina.
Hello. My name is Tina. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. I was born there. It's a pretty cool place. I never thought we were gonna have. I'm sorry. What? Okay. We'll do discussion later. Also, I'm probably gonna make some awkward jokes because that's what I do when I talk, and I hope it lands with a Canadian sense of humor. We'll see. So, on February 14th, 2011, 2,000 students, mostly grad students, also a lot of undergraduates, showed up at the Capitol in downtown Madison to protest this Act 10, basically a really shitty law that was going to make it almost impossible to organize unions. It was taking away a lot of health care for low-income families, which I know is like crazy for y'all to think about, but we don't have it. And so, 2,000 people, that was the biggest thing I had ever seen in my hometown, and I was freaking out. I was so excited and happy. And then the next day we had 10,000 people, and the next day was 15, and by the weekend it was close to, like 50,000 that weekend, and it got bigger and bigger because we actually were mobilizing to defend labor, but also the quality of life that we sort of expect. And I think it fits in really well with the theme of the Social Justice Week, with decent work and decent lives. We kind of think in the U.S. that we have decent lives, that we actually have it better than everywhere else in the rest of the world. That's what we tell ourselves and tell each other, which is why you shouldn't fight, because, hey, kids in Africa don't have food. And it's like, well, kids in downtown Chicago can't go to school. So, that's also not good. But I'm also going to share a quote. This is one of my favorites. Rosa Luxemburg said, "Those who do not move cannot feel their chains." And so I think what was so exciting about what happened in Wisconsin was the fact that people were fighting at all in the U.S., which we haven't really seen that in 40 years in a really serious way. We didn't even have much of an anti-war movement, even though we're the worst offender of imperialism. I know, by the way, it's cool, I get it. So see, there we go. So I'm going to try and stay focused on education, but this is going to overlap a lot with labor because that's what the bill was about, and that's also kind of where I see the biggest hope for movement work right now in the U.S. is through labor. Our labor unions are incredibly weak compared to what I've seen here in the past 24 hours. Okay, let me look at my notes. We were in the Capitol to defend teachers, and the first day that we went down there, which was the February 15th, the unions were bussing people in, and I remember I was talking to some of my high school social studies teachers, and they were calling each other and calling their union rep and seeing, are we going to go to work tomorrow? Are we going to sick out and go back to the Capitol to stand up against this law? The answer turned out to be yes, which was awesome. But meanwhile, the students started calling each other, and let's be real, there was a lot of Facebook involved, Facebook and Twitter, and we sort of told each other, we didn't have the time to organize each other. We just let everyone know, bring your sleeping bag, we're coming back to the Capitol because our teachers are getting screwed right now. So we joked that the students took the night shift and the workers took the day shift. Although students are also workers and will also be workers. It was kind of this trade-off. The major leading group of student organizers were the Teaching Assistants Association, which is our graduate student union. They're a fantastic union, still fighting. And so basically there were three groups of students that were organizing, and I'm an undergraduate student. We didn't do very much. There were not many of us out there, I'm going to be honest. The high school students independently organized themselves. So we had close to 200 high school students organize themselves from 4 different high schools, marched for miles to meet up at downtown Madison, and then marched with the college students to the Capitol to defend their teachers. This was on days when their teachers sicked out, so schools were closed, and they had a free day, and they said, but we're going to go to the Capitol to protest because we know that this is wrong. We know that education is important. So there were high school students, graduate students were just flipping awesome. And undergrads, we actually talked about, like, what about a student strike? And everyone was like, this is ridiculous. Students we don't go to class anyways. No one would notice if we went on strike. I think we've been proven wrong. But so that didn't happen. But when the teaching assistants, the graduate students that teach the majority of classes at the University of Wisconsin, actually, when they decided to stick out, or they decided to like maybe host their discussion section in the Capitol, we're just going to meet in a different place today, that helped. And so, in many ways, we were led by the graduate students, and they had, the fire behind them because they saw that the undergrads were marching with them. As we started to pick apart what was in this act, we started to see that there were serious attacks on education. At the same time that this had been coming up, the chancellor of the university, which, by the way, what a title, chancellor, that she proposed this thing called the New Badger Partnership. The badger is our mascot. And it was the definition of the privatization of higher education. It was like just such a classic example. They wanted to, really severely increase tuition. They wanted more flexibility. You name some neoliberal terminology, and I promise you, it was in the documents there. So what we did after the occupation of the Capitol ended was a bunch of students organized. Thank you. And we had a sit-in, which we do have a pretty strong history of sit-ins on our campus. It lasted 2 hours past closing time, so we were like, okay, did something. But the truth is, the legislature didn't want this privatization package to happen because they had their own plans for how to destroy public education, so they wanted to do it in their own way. So we kind of won, we thought, and now this year they're doing all the same things, but behind the scenes, there's no public accountability for it. They've made all these little committees and they're passing just recommendations to look into things, but we're seeing all the same elements of it, where they're trying to take away seniority rights for workers. They're trying to basically separate the University of Wisconsin from the system of 26 schools throughout the state. We're the flagship school. They really want to be their own, because we can get more donations. We can charge students a lot more money because it's, the flagship. Anyhow, so that's still going on, and it's still really gross, and we can talk about it at the bar later, but I'm going to move on. What came out of the protests in the Capitol, because that was kind of the question, is like, when I was asked about the student role, it was, we were there, we were supporting, and what have we built? It's in the works. A lot of really important networks came out of it. The thing is, it's like, everyone always asks, how did you do this? And there is no right answer for that, because, we kind of didn't. There's this thing that happens sometimes where there's a spark of spontaneous excitement and rebellion and fighting, but when you don't have organization, it just goes off into nowhere. And when you have organization, like we have a really strong student government at my school, but they don't really, actually work on student issues very much because there's no excitement. The students aren't pushing for things. They're not agitated. So organization without the spontaneous struggle doesn't work either. It just turns into bureaucracy. But so what happened in Wisconsin was we had this amazing outburst, but there was no real organization. I would say even really in the country. There were some unions, but a lot of them hadn't been fighting for a very long time, especially not in Wisconsin. So I'm going to move on before I offend people. I don't know. Okay. So there were these great coalitions that started, like the No Cuts, No Concessions coalition, which eventually became Wisconsin Resists. And it served as a sort of training ground for some rank and file union members who, maybe had been in their union but hadn't really considered seriously any workplace action, because we haven't seen much of that. And as I'm looking around right now to see what's going on and how is Wisconsin, how is the U.S. different than it was since last February, there's a lot of fighting right now. Did anyone hear about the Chicago Teachers Union going on strike? Oh my God, yes. Phew. That's great. And I'm gonna do a little bit of context about what education is like in Chicago. Because these teachers, technically they went on strike to talk about wages because that's all they legally could bargain over. But here were some of their demands. Their annual supply budget for their classroom was at $100. They wanted it to be pushed up to $250. I don't know how much you guys spend on school supplies every semester, but notebooks and pens and crayons for kids. Anyways, okay, so supply budget. They wanted smaller class sizes. Chicago public schools, it's not unusual to have 40 kids in a classroom. Think about that with 6-year-olds. It's crazy. They wanted windows that shut. Winter, you all know. You know what it's like. They wanted libraries in every school and also librarians to run them. Yeah. They wanted more support staff like nurses, social workers, psychologists. They also wanted every nurse and psychologist to have a locked cabinet because they don't all have a locked cabinet. This had to be a demand at the bargaining table with a Democratic mayor, right? Rahm Emanuel is the mayor of Chicago, and he was the chief of staff for Obama. Thank you. That hissing is correct. You got it. Ding, ding, ding. And so people were kind of shocked. They're like, why is a Democrat attacking education? Well, there's a bipartisan consensus that education costs a lot of money. In fact, it's really the last major public service that Americans have, or people in the U.S., I don't know if it's rude to say American because we're all North American. Anyways, it's the last real public service that we have and depend on. And so it's kind of, we're at this point where if we don't fight to defend public education, what are we going to fight for? What is left? And so the Chicago Teachers Union going on strike really was a game changer. Connecting this back to what happened in the Capitol, because I'm totally steering off of what they asked me to talk about. The Arab Spring was happening, and then we saw the Wisconsin uprising. A couple months after that, we had this thing called Walkerville, where we were occupying the square around the Capitol. And so every day we would go out and do different protests in the city, and then we would come back and we would occupy that space. Folks in New York were inspired by that. So our governor is named Scott Walker, so that's why it was Walkerville. Thank you. And so they were inspired by that in New York, and they had Bloombergville, because their mayor is Bloomberg. And it was a lot of the people who started Bloombergville who were really active in the beginning of Occupy Wall Street, which then exploded. So these things are connected. We see each other's struggles and we're inspired by them. I think students right now in the US are really inspired by what's been happening in Quebec, what's been happening in Chile, Mexico, Puerto Rico. And we're asking each other these questions of why can't that happen here, right? Same questions everyone's been mentioning. But we need to build serious organization. And we have this problem that some of you may be familiar with, where we won't really debate things. We'll just be like, oh, you think that other thing? Okay, I think you're wrong, but you can do what you want. We're very friendly in the Midwest. And it's just, you can be friendly and you can have friendly debate and disagree, and you should try to convince people. If you think you're doing the right thing to move us forward, to defend something really serious like education, you should argue for that and stand up for yourself. So, we're going to need a big paradigm shift. I think from Occupy we got the messaging of the 99% and the 1%. And while the numbers might not be quite accurate, it means that people are thinking about things in terms of class, which we haven't really done in the U.S. Everyone thinks, I will be that one who will become the next billionaire, and it's the American dream. If you work hard enough, you'll get it. And it's I'm sorry, but my parents have worked really hard their whole lives, and our house was still foreclosed on. That happens. We have 8 empty homes for every 1 homeless person in the country. 8 empty homes for every 1. That's nuts. That makes no sense, but it's more profitable to keep them open and empty. But yeah, it is a shame. Obviously, you all already agree with that, so yeah, okay. In terms of the main lessons, the things that I have learned going through this process and working with lots of different people, electoralism doesn't really work. People were literally pulled out of the Capitol to go, yes, electoralism is not the answer. We were occupying the state capitol, blocking legislators from getting into the room where they were going to go vote on this bill to take away our rights. The Wisconsin 14 who left, this was not really covered very well in the media. Everyone thinks they walked out. They couldn't physically get into the room, actually, because there were 10,000 people in between them. So thank you, people of Wisconsin. So electoralism doesn't work, but what does work would be movements. Really serious movements do work, and we've seen that here in Quebec, or well, here in Canada, whatever, samesies. We have to fight if we actually want to keep what we have, and if we want something bigger and better. I can't even say the American, like the U.S. student movement, because that's not a thing. Like, we don't have one yet, which is why those of us who are radical and are demanding more have been pulled sort of into labor, because we also are working to pay. University of Wisconsin costs $10,000 a year if you're from the state of Wisconsin. If you're not, it's $27,000 a year. They want to double that as a part of this new Badger partnership deal. So it'll be over $50,000 for 1 year of an undergraduate university education in a pretty rural state. It's not Harvard or anything. People don't. So I shouldn't say they're not excited about these degrees. I want one. Let's be real. The biggest challenge I think that we keep running into is everyone says, we want real stuff, we want schools, we want healthcare, we want decent jobs, and everyone says, well, who's going to pay for that? And one of the organizers of the Syriza coalition in Greece, I think, said it really well when they asked, where are you going to find the money? He says, you go where the money is, right? There's no shortage of money in the United States of America. There's plenty of it. It's just in a couple hands. So, I thought it was really interesting that folks were talking about the culture of democracy. We don't really have that, and it's cool. So I want to hear more about it. What does that feel like to be in a meeting where everyone feels like it's their part, their role, and that they get to participate? That's neat. More of that. One of the lessons that we learned from Occupy, but that we did not learn from Wisconsin, was about the role of the police. In Wisconsin, people still chant, thank you, to the cops. Meanwhile, in Chicago and Milwaukee, or just on the other side of town in Madison, they're shooting young black kids just because. It happens all the time and gets no publicity. But we saw when they were pepper spraying students at UC Davis in California that they don't actually want us to resist. Anyway, so that was something interesting. A difference there. And I just want to say that resistance breeds resistance. So we've got to keep fighting wherever you are. And you can't push for more than what your locality is ready for, but be inspired by each other's struggles and don't be afraid to connect them. I heard a weird argument where a lot of people were saying in Wisconsin that we can't compare ourselves to the Arab Spring because that's a totalitarian regime, and this is just we're in America. America's so good, right? But you can be inspired by the fact that they're dealing with bullshit, and so are we. And bullshit is bullshit wherever you are. So let's defeat the bullshit. And that's actually all I've got. So thanks very much.